mic on this side maybe? Okay. Okay guys, so we'll start. So this presentation, you guys are aware, it's on international trade. Okay, so we'll just, so it might be a little bit boring. Okay, I hope everyone is comfortable with English. Yeah, everyone is comfortable. So even if you're not, you have to get comfortable, because if you want to go in for a most of you guys are interested in a management degree, right? Is that correct? Right? So if you have to get, if you want to go in for management and careers in management, you have to get comfortable with English. So you should work on it on your own. If you're right now not 100% comfortable, you should work on that. And anyway, so I'll just start. And so this lecture might be a little bit boring, because I was given this topic of international trade. So if you want to cover international trade, you have to go through a little bit of the history of international trade, how it developed and all that. So that might get a little bit boring, you know, in terms of how, but I'll try to make it as interesting as possible. But anyway, this is stuff that you guys need to know. If you're going into, most of the stuff that I'm covering here is going to be material that you need to know if you are going to be involved in the world of business. So it's good to have that sense of how things have developed. And so it's take it like a lecture. Even if you don't find it very interesting, it's stuff that you need to know. So we'll just try to follow that, okay? So the way I've structured the presentation, let's see here. Okay, so we'll just try to go with this kind of a structure, follow this kind of structure in the presentation. So let's go one by one. So first, what we have to look at is the post-war history of international trade. We're not starting from before the Second World War, which is ended in 1945. So we're just going to look at the post-war, that we call the post-war period. So we'll just start with that and see how some of the institutions came about. Okay, so here you have what you have in 1944. Essentially, they started planning from 1944 itself, the British and the Americans, and you had this famous Bretton Woods Agreement, which was in the U.S. Mainly with the people who won the war. Okay, the Allied powers. So Britain, Russia, and the United States, and some of the European, the French, and the other European powers. So and also there was a plan to reconstruct Germany. So you had this agreement, and what you essentially got as a result of this agreement is you had the currencies of these major powers. They were made convertible for the purposes of trade. Okay, you know what freely convertible means? That you can freely exchange those currencies to pay for trade payments. And the other thing that happened was the exchange rates were all fixed against the US dollar. Okay, all the exchange rates were fixed against the US dollar. Just to give you an idea of what that means, I'll just try to cook up, just to give you an idea how things move. So this is a chart of the US of the British pound against the US dollar. Okay, so this is the modern day period in international exchange in currency markets. So you can see here how how volatile the currency markets are. You can see how this is actually the value of the British pound in terms of US dollars. Okay, so when you see 2.1 there, that is 2.1 means that 2.1 US dollars per British pound. Okay, so you can see here in the modern era, which we are here looking at a chart between say 2010 to starting from 2003. So you can see between 2000 say 5-6 and between 2015 how much movement, how much of a depreciation there was in the British pound. Okay, so this is the modern day era in currency markets. Okay, now this did not happen in 1945. What we had in 1945 was a system of fixed exchange rates, which stayed in place pretty much from 1945 all the way till 1971-72 when the system was broken. So there was a period, there was a regime after the war when exchange rates were fixed. So this kind of stuff was not happening between 1945 and 1971 essentially. Okay, so this is the modern era where you can see how volatile currency markets are. But in the post-war period, the meaning of the statement that exchange rates were fixed, the meaning of the statement essentially is that you did not have the kind of fluctuations which you just now saw on that particular chart, right? You're getting the point here? Okay. If you guys have any questions at any point of time, just ask, okay? If I think that something needs to be dealt with later, I will postpone it. Otherwise, I'll just address. So if I say something and you don't understand something, just put up your hand and ask, okay? I don't want, anyway, the material is a little bit kind of scholarly, so I don't want to make it too boring. If you have any question, just put up your hand and ask, okay? It's meant to give you guys some clarity. So the FX rates were fixed, okay? And the other important thing that happened was that the price of gold, okay, once again, if you look at the price of gold, XAU is a symbol that we use for, many of you guys have, I think you remember your periodic table? Do you remember periodic table? What was the symbol for gold? AU, right? And what was the symbol for silver? AG, right? So in the international markets, actually gold and silver are traded very actively. Okay, so the symbols for these assets, gold and silver, the symbols are XAU and XAG for gold and silver. They're taken from the periodic table. And then you also have in the precious metal market, you have also platinum and palladium also trading. So, so the other thing that happened in 1945 was that the value of the US dollar was fixed against gold. Okay, so you could actually take any US dollars. So the French, if a French company had earned, if the French government had earned a lot of US dollars because French companies were exporting to the US, okay, so as a result of that, the US customers were paying the French companies, and let's say the French government has accumulated a big supply of dollars, okay, are you following this logic? Okay, if the French sell to the Americans would pay them in dollars, and so the French would have a balance of dollars that they've earned from selling to the Americans. Okay, so this amount of money, that the dollars that the French had, they could actually tender that back to the United States and say, okay, I don't want these dollars, give me gold at the rate of $35 per troy ounce of gold. Okay, so gold in the international markets is traded not like here we have it 10 grams. Okay, so it is traded as was it 10 grams or 100 grams? I think it's 10 grams, right? So here, where in the international markets, gold is traded as in terms of 1 troy ounce, dollars per troy ounce. Troy ounce is a different measure from pure ounce. Okay, slightly different measure. You can Google it. So gold is traded in international markets as dollars per troy ounce. And in 1945, the price of gold was fixed at $35 per troy ounce. So essentially, what the French could do is, if they have all these dollars, they could just go to the US and say, take these dollars and give me some gold at the rate of $35 per troy ounce. Is this clear? And in fact, this is the kind of behavior that broke down the system, okay? Because what happened was that the US started running very large deficits, trade deficits, with a lot of countries, even including the French. And the French leader, Charles de Gaulle, I don't know if you've heard of this guy, he's that era, a leader from that age. So Charles de Gaulle wanted to embarrass the Americans, so what he wanted to, he kept on, tendering dollars, and, he wanted to take all the gold from the Americans. So he kept on tendering dollars and he kept on demanding gold in return. So eventually what happened was the US President Nixon, he got fed up and said, okay, this system is over now. Okay, the game is over. I'm changing the rules of the game. So I'm not going to give you dollars. So I'm changing this fixed parity system. I don't like this. So from tomorrow we will no longer exchange gold for dollars at $35 an ounce. Okay, so essentially that was the end of the fixed price regime for gold. So today, if you look at gold once again in the international markets, okay, I'll show you one more chart of gold. If you see. Okay. Yeah. So this is how gold has been moving. If you see from 1998, so tremendous amount of movement. This is the same thing that which used to be fixed between 1945 to 1971, that which used to be fixed at $35 an ounce, that used to be just a straight line. There was no movement on the chart. But after this 1971 period, when Nixon broke the gold standard, that was the gold standard, the regime of the gold standard. So Nixon took the US off the gold standard by saying basically that I don't like this, so we are going to go off the system. So now you see the kind of volatility that you get in gold. Okay, you can see how much the price has moved. Okay, there's a tremendous rally in the price of gold, then there's a decline, now it's kind of consolidating. So this is the kind of volatility that you have in international gold markets. Okay, this is again something to be aware of, because although India is one of the biggest, we are kind of alternating with China as one of the biggest buyers of gold. But we don't actually set the international gold price. The international gold price is set in markets, mainly set in London, which is the main center for trading precious metals. But it is actually a 24-hour market, 24 into 5, okay? Market that trades gold, okay? Gold, silver, platinum, etc. And that's where the international price is set. So this is what happens when you go off fixed rates. So this is another thing that happened in 1945. We had fixed rates, not this kind of volatility. Okay. So the other thing that has happened in 1945 is they set up the IMF and the World Bank group. You guys have all heard of these guys, IMF and World Bank. You know that in 1991, when India had some balance of payments problems, so the IMF came in and gave us some emergency assistance, etc., on foreign exchange loans and stuff. So these are the International Monetary Fund is essentially like kind of helping out all the sovereign nations with their cash flow problems in foreign currencies. When they are short of cash, they make loans. Like if you know, Pakistan right now is going to the IMF, okay, for a loan, etc., because they are not in good shape. And the World Bank Group essentially does a lot of these infrastructure financing. They have a lot of elements in the World Bank Group. There are about 5 institutions within the World Bank Group. You can Google that and see, including there's a settlement for, there's also a center called ISDS, the International Settlement for Dispute Settlement. Okay, that settles all these trade. You can settle all kinds of disputes. Arbitration mechanisms are provided. So it's a complex group, the World Bank Group. So this is basically what happened in Bretton Woods. And then what we had was, we also had in 1948, we formed another, have you guys heard of this organization, GATT? Okay, you might have had to do it for your GK prep and all that, right? So this GATT was also formed, it was formed in 1948. That was a general agreement on tariffs and trade. And the objective of the GATT was essentially to continuously have rounds of negotiations, okay, and try and bring down the tariffs. Okay, you understand what tariffs are? We'll deal with tariffs a little bit later. But you know what tariffs are? Yeah? These are like import duties, okay? So it's essentially import taxes, okay? So if we have tariffs in India on, let's say, the import of, say, steel, that means that any foreign steel that is coming into India, whatever their price is, additionally, we will add some tariffs, okay? We'll add some 5% tariff or 10, whatever the tariff is. So the idea was, when they formed the GATT, the idea was that they would progressively bring down all the tariffs, because in that time, in 1945-46, they had very high tariffs around the world. So what they wanted to do was actually bring down the tariff rates around the world and have some kind of move towards freer trade, because trade would bring prosperity. Okay, so that was the idea. And so they had several negotiations, okay, under the GATT framework, and they had like between 48 and 94. The last one is called the Uruguay round in 1994. Okay. And when they did this Uruguay round in 1994, they did, because before 1994, what we had was all these negotiations before 1994, they were all focused on trade and goods, okay? You understand the difference in goods and services, okay? So the pre-94 discussions related only to trade and goods, not to services trade or intellectual property, etc. So what they did in 94 is that they expanded the scope of the agreement, okay, and tried to cover agriculture, services markets, okay. So it was not just goods anymore, but agriculture, services, and also IPR. IPR is intellectual property rights, okay. So there was an agreement on the trade-related, something called TRIPS, TRIPS, okay. It's the trade-related intellectual property rights. So they had an agreement on that as well. And so this is what happened in the Uruguay round in 1994. So if you see, essentially, so this is what happened. So you see the progress from, you set up after the Bretton Woods Agreement, you set up GATT, you go through several rounds of negotiations, trying to bring down tariffs on goods. And then in 1994, you extend the scope of those, trade liberalizations measures to not just goods, but also services and agriculture, and also intellectual property rights. Okay, so the world is moving slowly towards freer and freer trade. Okay, then after that you had also this another important thing that happened after the conclusion of the Uruguay round is they formed what is called, you guys have also heard of this one, WTO. Okay, so this is the World Trade Organization. So this also was formed, it was not there in 1948, although they wanted to set up something like that, but it wasn't possible. So this came up in 1995, pretty much close to the Uruguay round, ending of the Uruguay round. Okay, so essentially here you can see the same, the other things that were added in the WTO agreement was also you had new procedures for settling disputes under international trade law. So a new branch of the law started to be developed further, that is international trade law. Okay, that is happening under the auspices of the WTO. Okay, so all this happened, and then so you see progressive movement on a multilateral basis. All this stuff is happening on a multilateral basis, right? You understand the difference between multilateral and bilateral? Bilateral is if I do a deal with him between the two of us, that's a bilateral transaction. Multilateral is if all of us get together in this room and all of us agree on certain common terms that will apply to all transactions between all parties. Okay, so that's a multilateral agreement. So what you're seeing here in all these kinds of agreements like the GATT, the WTO, these are all multilateral frameworks for negotiating international trade, terms of international trade. Okay, so this is the framework that you had, and you continued with that, and then eventually we had this new round called the Doha round. Okay, that is based because it was started in Doha, Qatar. So this was called the Doha round, that came up in 2001. Okay, and this is still going on actually. It's very difficult to get agreement on because India has also been pressing certain demands. Okay, so we have also not. We are one of the countries that actually is holding up the finalization of the Doha round. Okay, so because we are not getting some of the things that we want. So this Doha round, actually there was one twist made in the Doha round, is that they tried to bring in a special focus on developing countries. So that's why this Doha round of talks is governed by what is sometimes called the Doha Development Agenda, which means here one of the things they said was that we will make some special concessions for, remember this is a multilateral setting, so all the all the countries are there, the developing countries and the developed countries. So the developed countries agreed that we would make some special concessions for developing countries. Okay, and one of the things that many developing countries like in Africa, okay, they are big exporters of agricultural products, because a lot of agricultural products are found even in the Caribbean. They sell a lot of bananas and all kinds of stuff. So a lot of developing countries, because they're quite poor, they don't have technology, they don't have an industrial base, but some of them may have a lot of agricultural products to sell because it's easier to produce those. So the idea was that the developed countries like the Western countries would open up more of their markets to agricultural exports from the developing countries. Okay, this was one of the ideas that was floated in the Doha round. This would essentially, the idea was that we would try to make some extra effort to bring up the developing countries. Okay, that was the idea. So this is essentially what you see, and now you have the WTO membership is about 164 countries. It covers a lot of international trade, a big part of international trade. And this is essentially broadly, as I said, this part might have been a little bit boring because it's just kind of history, but it's important to be aware of how things develop, because you learn a lot of things about how countries and people work together by reading history. Okay, so now this is more interesting, right? Trump is more interesting. Is that right? More interesting than the history of global trade. Okay, so one of the things that you see is very interesting stuff that is happening because of the positions that Trump has taken. Okay, in fact, let me just go back a little bit and see. You have this WTO, and you see 164 countries in the WTO, right? So one of the countries that got into the WTO, I think this happened in, not sure, maybe it's about 20 years ago. So it's about 2001, I think. In I think 2001 or so, China entered the WTO. Okay, so China obviously is a very big economy and a very big force in the global economy. So one major event happened in around 2001, that is China's entry into the WTO. And many people were afraid of what that would do to their own prospects. So, they put in a lot of conditions, etc. But essentially what has happened is one of the problems that has happened is that many of the countries around the world, and I think nobody disputes this, most countries, even the Western European countries, the Japanese, the Asians, almost everybody agrees universally that China has not fulfilled its commitments under the WTO. So China made certain agreements, okay, they promised certain things, but they haven't delivered on their promises, okay, so they have kind of cheated. If you want to be very, you don't care about being diplomatic, then you say that like Trump is not very diplomatic. So President Trump would say that they have been cheating, okay? So you agree to certain terms and then you don't fulfill those terms. So it's like cheating, okay? So now the thing that has happened is that China has not been playing fair in international trade, and they have not been adhering to what they agreed to under the WTO. But no other country, no country in the world until Trump came along, no leader, no global leader, like whether it's any leader in France or Germany, okay, or Japan, anywhere, nobody ever called them out. It's like, you know that somebody is cheating, okay, it's like people are playing a game and you know that someone is cheating, and everyone knows that they're cheating, but nobody has the guts to say that you just point to this guy and say you're cheating, okay, in front of everybody. Nobody has the guts. You know this happens also sometimes in social settings and other settings. It's just because nobody had the guts to do it, because everybody was too afraid that, I mean, why should I say something so unpopular and unpalatable, and I'm going to rock the boat. Most people don't want to rock the boat. That's the problem. They don't want to say something which is so shocking. So what happens, so the reason that President Trump is very interesting is because he doesn't give a damn, okay? He just says what he thinks is right. He doesn't give a damn about what people think, who's going to think that, oh my God, what did he say, and all these things. So that has a lot of advantages. So he's actually the first global leader to openly call out the Chinese and say you're cheating, okay, in front of everybody. So this is a very interesting event in the world, in the development of global trade, because because a lot of these imperfections had developed in the global trading system. In the global trading system, in the WTO system, a lot of imperfections had developed. A big player like China wasn't actually playing by the rules, and everybody knew it, and nobody had the guts to say anything. So this guy comes along and he just smashes the glass bowl and just tells it like it is and starts putting pressure on China, okay? So although everybody is actually complaining about why is he putting tariffs, why is he putting tariffs on China? Why is he putting tariffs on the Europeans, etc.? And this is not the way to do it. Nobody has offered an alternative technique, okay, as to how to fix the system. And everybody agrees that the system is broken. Everyone agrees that the system is broken. So he's the only one who called them out openly, and he's taking certain measures by imposing tariffs. And so what I find funny about the way the other people are reacting, the other global leaders are reacting, is that they're all saying that, no, tariffs, we agree that there is a problem, but tariffs is not the way to fix this problem. So if I were, and Trump has not said this, but if I were him, then I would say, okay, fine, if you think tariffs are not the way, then tell me what is the way. So what they do is actually they say this is not the way, but they don't give you an alternative. So what's the point? I don't find that very constructive. If you're criticizing my method of doing something, then you should give me an alternative. So anyway, so this is what is going on now in the international arena. So I think it's a very interesting time in international trade. And I think hopefully if China comes to the bargaining table, because they are actually playing quite dirty with Donald Trump and trying to wait out the elections and things like that. So I don't know what actually will happen with the US and China. But essentially what Donald Trump has done is he's actually pointed out many interesting new aspects of trade, which no one had ever mentioned, and some of these things I've also learned based on what he has done. Is one of the things, if you if you look at what he's done, is you guys are aware that he has put steel and aluminium tariffs. You're following this trade dispute quite closely. I suggest you do, because if you're going to be business students, international trade is a very important part of the business world. So I'll show you some links. Give you some TV channels that you can look at, international business television. Okay, you should follow this dispute closely, because as you see this thing going on, because this guy has actually just really shaken things up, and a lot of changes which were actually required are now starting to happen because he's shaken things up. So if you follow this dispute, it will not only be useful for your current affairs, etc., but it will give you a good understanding of various aspects of world trade. Okay, so one of the things that Donald Trump has done is he has put in steel and aluminium tariffs on even the allies of the US, not just China, but even the allies of the US, like Mexico, like the European Union, Canada. Okay, and the reason he has done that is he's talking about the importance of steel and aluminium for the defense industry. You understand that steel and aluminium is very important for defense? right? So, and the situation in the global economy, on the global stage is not exactly peaceful. There is a lot of stuff going on in the South China Sea. I don't know if you're aware that China has been building artificial islands in the South China Sea. Okay, and there was a dispute with the Philippines. But most of the countries in Asia are not big enough to challenge China. Okay, so all of them get beaten down. Okay. So, so there is a very high likelihood that in the next 4 to 6 years, there might be a war in the South China Sea, okay, between the US and China, the US and its allies in China. There might be an invasion of Taiwan. That risk is also quite high. Okay, so very recently, just about a week or so ago, the US has sailed 2 warships through the Taiwan Straits. Okay, you're aware of this Taiwan problem that we have. Okay. So anyway, so what has happened here clearly is that there is a very clear risk of war happening. And what Trump is saying is that we don't want to depend, because steel and aluminum are so important for defense, for building all your tanks, missiles and everything. So these are so critical, and these 2 industries are so critical in terms of defense, that we must have a domestic steel and aluminum industry. Okay, and therefore he's putting tariffs on imported steel and aluminum and forcing, making those much more expensive. You understand the impact of that, right? That if we put tariffs on imported, let's say imagine you're in the US, okay, and you put tariffs, let's say the US steel is selling at say $20 a ton, okay, and the imported steel is being sold in the US market at $18 a ton. So obviously the US manufacturers will not be able to compete because their cost of production, or they're selling at $20 to make a profit. So what they're doing, the Trump administration is doing, let's say they put a $3 or $5 tariff on imported steel. So now imported steel will be selling in the US at 18 plus 5, $23. Are you following? Okay. So dollars per ton. Okay. So if we put a $5 per ton tariff, I'm just giving a random example. So then what happens is that imported steel in the US market starts selling at $23 a ton, and the US producers are selling at $20 a ton. So obviously they'll be able to capture more of the market, the US producers, right? So this way the US steel and aluminum industry will be kept alive, because many steel plants had closed, many aluminum plants had closed in the US because they were getting most of the stuff from outside. So one of the things that Donald Trump has done is that he's put his foot down and said, no way, this steel and aluminum business is going to happen here. We are going to have a thriving domestic steel and aluminum industry, and if I have to put tariffs, I'm going to do it, because it's a strategic industry. These are strategic industries from a defense standpoint. So he sees, and the other thing that had happened was that under 8 years of Obama, he had really neglected the defense sector for the US. Okay, so he really underfunded the military, so they've actually gone down a lot in strength. So he has a catching up to do. Donald Trump has a lot of catching up to do as well on the military. So because of this is one more element that you can see, that he has brought in this aspect of the defense industry and the national security aspect. The national security aspect of, so his point is that if I'm at war with China, I don't want to depend on steel coming from Canada and then I build my tanks. Okay, steel must be made internally in the US. So the very important point that comes out of this kind of discussion, this kind of idea that Donald Trump has introduced, is that, see, if you look back, this is a little bit, I'm putting the cart before the horse, but you guys have, some of you have familiarity with international free trade, theories of international trade, where we say that free trade is the best option. You guys are familiar with this idea? That free trade brings prosperity, okay? That the best way to have prosperity is to have free trade, not to have any tariffs, etc. Okay, so just have free trade between all the countries. So one of the criticisms that have been leveled against Donald Trump's actions in terms of imposing tariffs, okay, is that has come from academics and other people who believe in these classical theories of free trade, that the best way to ensure prosperity is to have free trade between all the countries, which is actually on its own, the argument is okay, it's a correct argument, but there is a problem. The problem is, this is a problem that I think Donald Trump has brought out for the first time. The problem is that all those theories in which you come out with the solution of free trade being the best option, right? You have all these models, best option, right? In those models, what is happening is this. What happened? Okay. So the second point, I'm just dealing with the second point that I'm discussing right now. Okay. So the idea is that in the free trade, the classical free trade theories, the economists will always tell you that free trade is the best solution, okay, because their models give you free trade as the best solution. But what happens is the reason that Donald Trump is actually correct, okay, and that you need to modify the classical theories of free trade is because in those models of free trade, they have never considered geopolitical rivalries. You know what a geopolitical rivalry is? You've heard this term before? Geopolitical rivalry, let me give you an example, like India and Pakistan have a geopolitical rivalry. India and China have so from a geopolitical perspective, our biggest threats are China and Pakistan, okay? So this is what is meant by geopolitical rivalries, okay? Like Japan and China also have a history of conflict, okay? Then the US and Russia have a history of conflict because of the Cold War after the Second World War, okay? So all these are called, I mean, you can refer to these as geopolitical rivalries, okay? Geo comes from geography and political comes from politics, okay? So the interesting thing that I believe that Trump is the first person to point this out is that while on its own, on paper, the international, the classical free trade theories are correct, that free trade brings prosperity, but it needs to be modified by this national security argument that Trump is putting forward, because in those models, we have never considered geopolitical rivalries. So when we came up with those classical economic theories and said that free trade is great and it's the best way to bring prosperity, we have assumed automatically that everyone is at peace with other people. Okay, we have assumed that the world is at peace, and that's why we came out with those solutions, that free trade is the best solution. Okay, we assumed that everyone is at peace. We never assumed that there were any geopolitical rivalries, that one country was trying to take down another country, okay, that there would be some enmity between countries. Those assumptions never entered into the picture, and that's why you assume that free trade across the board, including steel and aluminum and everything. Okay, are you following what I'm saying? Okay, so here's where Trump has a lot of insights that he brings to the table, which I find quite fascinating, because he comes up with very unique insights, and internationally the media has been always trashing him. So I think it's important to get a different perspective, because on many matters he's actually very correct. He's pointing out some important flaws in the system. Okay, so this is the thing, that free trade theory, academic theories of free trade have never factored in geopolitical rivalry. They always assume that everyone is at peace with each other. But do you think that's the real nature of the world? It has never been the real nature of the world. People have always been fighting with each other. There have always been rivalries, okay? So that's why this is actually a very interesting sort of twist that he has delivered to international trade theory, that you have to factor in aspects of national security, because you are never going to have a world which is completely at peace. There are always going to be geopolitical rivalries, and your defense sector has to be very strong. Okay, and so that the only way you can have peace is that you are so powerful, your military is so powerful that no one dares to attack you. That's the only way you can ensure peace, and that will never change. Okay, so this is a very important point to understand because I wanted to tell you this, because you will never hear this anywhere else, because everybody is busy trashing Trump. Okay, it's become fashionable to just trash Trump, and people don't realize that he's actually making some very good points. Okay. And okay, so the steel and aluminum is one part. Okay, so so he's introduced these steel and aluminum tariffs to basically build up his war machine. He's also introducing some national security elements into the autos and auto parts sector. Okay, that is also that is in a development that is happening. There you have this trade act. This is basically the section of the trade act under which he's doing that. Okay, and so other international trade developments that you have to follow, that you should be aware of, is that he has already done, since Donald Trump came into office, there was a trade deal called NAFTA. Were you guys aware of that? North American Free Trade Agreement. NAFTA, this was basically signed by Bill Clinton, okay, in the mid-90s or so. So this NAFTA was a North American Free Trade Agreement basically between Mexico, US and Canada. As you know, geographically, if you look at the map, Canada is on top, US is in the middle, Mexico is below the US, right? So all these three countries like trading like one big country, because all the barriers to trade, all the tariffs were removed, most of the tariffs were removed on many of those products. So that's why it was called the North American Free Trade Agreement, creating one free trade zone between these three countries. So this NAFTA actually was a very old agreement, because it was done in the mid-90s, as I said, and it had become quite obsolete in many ways. But again, until Donald Trump came along, and the US was losing out. The other thing that was happening was the US was losing out big time. okay, because of the trend. There was a trend in the post-war era, okay, from the 1945 onwards, because the US emerged as the strongest nation after World War II. They were by far the strongest and most prosperous nation. So what they did is, like a generous big brother, they tried to help out all the other nations, like the Europeans, because Germany was devastated after the war, okay, and the UK was also in very bad shape, okay. That is one of the reasons we won independence, because Hitler basically damaged the UK so much in the Second World War that the British realized that we just can't afford to maintain this colony here and all the way here in Asia anymore. So partly we owe our independence to Hitler also, because he basically just broke the back of the British Empire. Hitler and the Japanese, they both broke the back of the Hitler. It's not a popular thing to say in India, because we like to say it is due to us, but partly we have to also recognize, because the Second World War basically broke the back of Great Britain, and they just couldn't afford to maintain this colony anymore. So that's it. So essentially what I was saying is that after the Second World War, the US emerged as a strong and prosperous nation, and they were very generous with their trade arrangements with all the other countries. The losers like Germany and Japan, and the other allies like the UK, France, okay, and the Soviet Union, everybody, and the Canadians. So they gave everybody very generous trade deals, so that, you know, you guys can also come up. We are so strong and powerful that we are going to just lend you an extra helping hand. We are going to give you concessional trade deals so that you guys have a chance to come up. Are you following what I'm saying? So this was the attitude after 1945. So the US had given a lot of concessions. But then from 1945, many of these countries have now developed quite a lot. But these old trade arrangements had remained in place. And nobody had, just because, as I said, nobody wants to rock the boat, nobody wants to say unpopular things. So nobody had the guts to say what Trump is now saying. He's saying now that, okay guys, now I don't have to be, I don't have to give you concessions anymore, because you guys have all grown up, you're quite powerful economies now on your own. So let's now trade on a fair basis, on an even platform. Okay, this is something that nobody else had the guts to do, because because Donald Trump saw that the US was suffering, because the US was giving too many concessions, okay, and therefore he said that no, this is no longer fair. You guys are now all grown up, you're quite capable. Let's have trade on an even basis, no more special concessions. So this is the way he basically, that's why he went after NAFTA. NAFTA was already a very old agreement, and the US was losing out, and Mexico was the biggest gainer under NAFTA. Okay, because they were very underdeveloped, and they gained a lot of development because of NAFTA, and Canada was also winning. So the US was losing out, because from this 1945 era, when the US had taken a deliberate stance to help the others and undermine its own interests. Okay, so this is something again that Donald Trump is changing. As you know, NAFTA has now already been renegotiated. Okay, you're aware of that? There is a new deal. It's called the USMCA, the United States, Mexico and Canada Agreement. Okay, so NAFTA is gone, basically, tore it up. Okay, so now you have this new agreement. Yeah, we are running out of time. Okay, you guys have a class or something to go to? Okay, sorry, I'm so sorry. But anyway, so we have a lot of material, but we will not be able to discuss that much time. We don't have that much time. But anyway, so what I'll do then is I'll just make sure that I'll just spend a little bit of time on a couple of other important things. Since we are discussing Donald Trump, let's keep that focus, and I'll just give you a couple of other important points. So what he's doing is he's so try to understand all this and follow this. This is very important events, because the media will not highlight it. Okay, and that he's renegotiating a lot of trade deals. South Korea US trade deal, which was done under Obama, has been renegotiated, Obama or Clinton. Okay, the old trade deal has been renegotiated by Trump. A new trade deal between South Korea and the US, which is fairer to the US. Okay, a new trade deal has come up. Then another deal that is coming, obviously the Mexico, Canada have been renegotiated. They're talking to Japan. Okay, and remember, they're also talking to India. Okay, so we should also take this opportunity. Our Indian press is so anti-national almost, because they never look at the national interest. Like fools, they go and criticize Trump. They don't look at the national. We should look at the US. Let's face it. I mean, you're all young men of voting age, young men and women of voting age. I think we should discuss this also as Indians, that we have to see, let's face it, the US is the top dog. There is no country in the world that comes anywhere near the US as an economic and a military power. Okay, and if you today have an administration in the US which is quite favorable towards India, okay, so we should take this opportunity to bring our relationship closer, and if we can have a free trade deal with the US, our economy will also benefit massively. because it's such a big economy. The US is such a big economy. So we should take this opportunity, but sometimes I feel that our administrators are not, being very active about it. We should not lose this opportunity. Okay, the other thing that I wanted to, so essentially I wanted to just give you this message that what Trump promised in the G7, okay, is that he said to all these people, and he said that let's cut all tariffs. Let's have just free trade, no tariffs, no non-tariff barriers, okay, and no subsidies. Let's have real free trade between all countries. But these countries were basically not willing to step up. Okay, so that's another mistake. So he's actually pushing for free trade. Okay, he's actually pushing for free trade. So that is something that we have to understand and embrace that concept. Okay, so you guys are filling up forms, so I don't know whether it makes sense to talk to you at this stage. But I just wanted to mention one more thing about, before you just briefly, that also again, because our media is not very focused on the national interest. The other thing that we should all understand as Indians is that the Trump administration is very favorable, very good for India in two ways. First, it's very bad news. Trump is very bad news for Pakistan. You have seen that he has cut aid for 300 billion out of the aid has been cut. Their military officers used to go at US expense to West Point and the Naval Academy at Annapolis for training. That's been stopped. Okay, the first time in many, many years that Trump has stopped it. So Trump is very anti-Pakistan. So for me, if you're anti-Pakistan, then I love you. Okay, so as an Indian, if I see a US president who is anti-Pakistan, then for me, I support that president, because Obama was not so anti-Pakistan. And the other thing that you have to understand is, as Indians, is that Trump is also very bad news for China, because he's hitting them on trade, he's hitting them on the South China Sea, okay, on Taiwan. So what is going to happen today is your biggest enemy, our biggest enemy, which is China. The biggest threat to India as a military power is China. And what is going to happen is your biggest enemy, our biggest enemy, is going to be engaged in a tussle with the biggest military and economic superpower in the world. So is that good for us or no? It's good for us, because our biggest enemy is now going to be occupied fighting the biggest brother of all. So we will have some more peace, because they'll have less time to irritate us. So these are the two things which I wanted to highlight. Why? Because the Indian media is very, very anti-Trump, because they just copy the US. They don't highlight how important the Trump administration is for India from a geopolitical perspective. We have to see everything through the lens of national interest. That how can we use this situation for our benefit? Is this clear? Okay, so the lecture might have seemed a little political, but I mean, at the end of the day, we are all Indians, so we look out for our political interest. Okay, whatever benefits India is good, is something that we support. Okay, so I think we are done.